Tonight on Free Minds TV, an Indiana sheriff discusses the possibility of random house-to-house searches. Also, the state courts in the state of California are denying the right to a public trial. We'll also be talking about a proposal by former President Clinton and something about some guy in Michigan who won the lottery. That coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
You have tuned into episode 205 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
Got a lot to talk about today. Nick, unfortunately, not a lot of good news going on out there. It looks like this police state that we've been talking about, well, since we've gone on the air, about 5-6 years ago. I don't know how long it's been now. It's growing, and I mean, every day it seems like it inches further and further and further. If we were talking about
It does. It does. Because
we
some of the things we've predicted that would come next, like if a case like this gets through, then next they'll want to search your houses randomly. We've gotten to the point where, the what ifs or what could happen is something that has happened.
Well, it's crazy because if you talked about these issues when we first started the show, some of these stories, it would almost seem crazy 5 years ago. But since we've inched our way there. And
inched fairly quickly, though.
It is quickly.
It's 5 or 10
amazing.
years. What goes from seeming paranoid to being the actual news. At first you're paranoid to entertain the notion 10 years ago. Now it's just the way things are in some parts of the country.
Yep. But I mean, if this had happened 5-10 years ago, people would have said, "No way! This is trampling on our fundamental human rights, trampling on our privacy." But it's a brave new world, I guess. And the frog in hot water, he's getting mighty toasty and warm in his cooking pot. And I guess it's tough to just turn down that temperature because the American public, it seems some of them are clamoring for this. There's a few people on the fringe like us who are saying enough is enough. What are you going to do? Anyways, I do think it's important to discuss the issue so at least people know what we're getting into here. I mean, what is next? Are house-to-house searches really the next thing down the line? I don't think it's gotten to that point yet.
I would hope the courts would stop that.
But, the courts are ruling that, we talked about on Free Minds Radio last week, that the courts have ruled that you no longer have the right to refuse police entry into their home, even if it's an illegal entry. So
in Indiana, they ruled that.
Yeah, so, I mean, the police in Indiana come to your house. They say, "We want to come in your house." You go, "No, you don't have a warrant." Guess what? You need to let them in anyways, even without a warrant. So goodbye, Fourth Amendment, thrown out the books.
Well, there's still the question of whether it would be admissible in court.
Maybe. I don't know. That's up in the air, but regardless, you're letting police officers in your home when it's supposed to be your castle, right? If they don't have a warrant, they're not supposed to be allowed to get in. So how will individual sheriffs and police officers in Indiana interpret this? Well, this is coming from Crown Point, Indiana, where according to the Newton County Sheriff Don Hartman, random house-to-house searches are now possible and could be helpful following the Barnes v. State of Indiana Supreme Court ruling that was issued on May 12, 2011. When asked 3 separate times about his comments due to, they're pretty much way out there saying random house-to-house searches are now possible, he emphatically indicated that he would use the random house-to-house checks and added that he felt people will welcome searches if it means capturing a criminal. After all, if you don't have anything to hide when the police come a knocking, of course you'll invite them in because you're a good, honest citizen, right? And if you don't have anything to hide, of course, should be open door policy for the police officers, right? I don't think so, but apparently Mr. Hartman, Sheriff Hartman here, thinks so, and he thinks that the American public will welcome them in, which scares me a little bit, Nick, because I know that there's a lot of people out there who, yes, they would. They have that attitude is, if you don't have anything to hide, why are you hiding from the government? Why do you care about these wiretapping things going on the phone lines? Why do you care if they're snooping in on what you're doing on the internet? Why do you care about the security checkpoints that are popping up on random highways? Why do you care about the airport and essentially being molested as you go through TSA checkpoints? Why do you care if you have random house-to-house searches? If you're a good citizen following the rules, you have nothing to hide. And there are a lot of people out there. That's what's scary to me, is it's gotten to the point where there's sheriffs out there who are saying, yes, I'm going to use random house-to-house searches now.
I guess as little faith as I have left in the courts, especially after ruling like we saw coming out of Indiana, where they said you don't have a right to prevent police officers from coming into your home, even if they're entering illegally, which means they don't have any, they're not carrying out the business of the court or of the state. They're just criminals at that point. If you say no when they come in, they're just forcing entry into your home. So, this is the logical outcome of that ruling, because if you don't have the right to say no, then the police can go into your house and search. Now, if they actually apprehend a criminal who has an outstanding warrant or something like that, then sure, I suppose they could take them into custody. But I'm hoping that the courts wouldn't say that the evidence gathered, if they went into your home and found some violation, would be admissible in court to prosecute you, because they didn't have a warrant to get it in the first place.
True,
and they had no consent.
That's only for the people who know their rights and say, no, you can't come in my home. Because don't forget, this is what the police officers will do. They'll knock on the door and say, we have the right to come into your home. There's a criminal on the loose. Can we come in and look around? We have the right to do that. That's what they're going to tell people. They're not going to say, they're just bust right in. They're going to knock on people's door and go, you have nothing to hide. We're looking for a dangerous criminal. Can we come in and look around? Most people are going to say, yeah, sure. They're going to see news stories where the police officers say, like this one, where he goes, we have the right under the Supreme Court ruling in Indiana, we have a right to search your homes randomly. And your average citizen out there, not really educated in their constitutional rights, is going to go, yeah, sure, come on in.
And they might at that point, then the evidence would likely be admissible, because if you don't say no, you can't come in.
How many people out there say no to a police search when you're pulled over in a car? How many people say no?
Not very many.
Most people. I would say yes to, just because I want to move along. I don't want them to ransack my car and rip it to shreds like they do. If you exert your rights, they're more likely to ransack your car and hold you up on the road for hours and hours.
Yeah, if they can get
which is a rubber stamp, Nick.
They're not going to, no.
If they want to, usually it's a threat. Usually they'll tie you up and waste time. If you have to get somewhere and you have nothing to hide, most people say yeah.
I would be inclined to say yes.
I'm saying,
I guess it depends how important my appointment was.
But what my point is, I'm talking about the average citizen out there. What is the public going to do? And so how long is it until, if this happens, and I'm hoping it won't, I'm hoping the Supreme Court will strike this down. You never know, though. I'm afraid that if this is the precedent we're starting to set, that it'll just become the norm that police search your house when they want to.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was saying before the show. That's one of the last things we really still do have going for us here in the U.S. is that, police are required to get a search warrant before they just come onto your property. So you at least still have some freedom on your property, and you can more or less do what you want. I mean, if no one on your property calls the police and they don't have probable cause to come, to get a warrant to come onto your property, you're more or less free in your castle, in your home. At this point, that's how it works, and that's how it should be. It's your property, and supposedly we live in a free society, so what you're doing, as long as you're not hurting anybody else on your own property.
A big supposedly on that, because in this country, the word freedoms and liberties have been morphed to mean luxuries and being comfortable. I mean, that's what, when you hear politicians, especially most politicians, when you hear them talk about freedom and liberty and the soldiers out there fighting for our freedoms and liberties, they're not talking about the right to be free from an oppressive government and the right to have your neighbors not be able to bother in on your business if it's not hurting anybody else. They're talking about being comfortable, having this way of life, the American way of life. That's what the term freedom and liberty has morphed into. It's not talking about the right to be a sovereign individual anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to point out too, that what's being protected is freedoms and liberties when we're talking about soldiers especially and the federal government protecting them and all. We're talking about comfortability. American interest is the ability for many people to be comfortable. Not everybody, of course, because the divide between the rich and the poor is growing larger and larger, but what freedoms and liberties actually mean, it's not to be the right to be a free person, a sovereign individual, a free person not tied down by any rulers. It's talking about a way of life, being comfortable and, protected from other people in other countries.
Those two things have been conflated, which is ironic, because if you actually look back and you understand some of the concerns that were voiced and some the opinions of the people who largely put together the U.S. system, the constitutional system that we have today, and the people who took part in the revolution, their understanding of how republics worked and how free societies worked was that they required a virtuous citizenry. And by the standards of the time, when they said it required public virtue, virtue meant that you put a public good, like other people's freedom, before your own interests, like business interests. So to remain a free society, they were very clear and very correct. I mean, they were looking at examples from, from history, from antiquity at that point, because most of the republics prior to that, that they had to, they were able to draw from for experience, were, ancient Greece, Rome. They saw that actually, once people became very wealthy, typically that's when republics sort of degraded into empires and tyrannies, because people started to place, material possessions ahead of, their fundamental liberties or virtue, higher principles. And that's what's happened here. I think the U.S. is a very materialistic culture, and I say that as somebody who's a free market capitalist because I believe in freedom as a virtue. Freedom is a virtue, and that does allow you to be more prosperous. When what you treat as a virtue is material possessions and money, when that's your guiding light instead of ideas.
Yeah.
That's where we've gone awry.
Right, and I've been thinking
we're
a lot.
a new Rome,
It's interesting because I've been thinking about what these terms mean, freedoms and liberties and stuff, because you hear them bandied about so often. Every politician is talking about them. The only one who I think is actually talking about what the country was founded on, or more of a sovereign freedom, or the virtues like you were talking about, Nick, would be Ron Paul, and he's not 100% principled either. Really, no politician is, but at least he's much further along, and you can really get some good education from him. But I'm wondering, what are the others actually talking about? And I do think it's that the things, the way of life. You're talking about being comfortable, and that's what the American people, for a large majority, they like just being comfortable, having their car, their flat screen TV, their way of life. Being able to eat out at restaurants and stuff. Those are what we consider freedoms now, unfortunately. It's really been a morphing of the actual words. I'd rather they say the soldiers out there are fighting for Americans to be comfortable, or the soldiers are out there fighting for the American way of life. That would make more sense. At least you'd be being honest. But it really convolutes the whole subject when you're talking about freedoms and liberties. And so I thought that was important to just point out. I know it's kind of off the subject, but how it relates to this story of house-to-house searches is what the public perceives it as. We're still going to say that we live in a free country, even though the police that we have to bow down to, some of them are saying that random house-to-house searches are now right and should be the way of life. So, all right.
Random.
They just don't even whenever they want.
They can just molest you in your home, like, without any kind of notification.
Yep, just knock on your door.
They don't even have to show, that's all it is. They can already search your home if they can show enough cause to get a warrant. But now they can search your home without cause.
And guess what if you say no? All right, Nick, moving right along. It doesn't look like this is the only place where some fundamental freedoms and liberties are being completely eroded. One of the things this country was founded on is an open and public trial.
It's all, the public trial is older than that. Public trial goes back.
But it was very important to this country and to the founders of this country.
But the right to a public trial in Anglo law goes back. You can look back like 1,000 years.
And we've lost that when it comes to
not quite, but 700.
And terror suspects, people have gone, oh, they're bad people. We have to hide their trials. You can't look at those. And juveniles, I can see some arguments with juveniles and some some rape cases and stuff, or child abuse cases. I can see some arguments there. The terror suspects, I'm sorry, I don't see those arguments, having to have war tribunals and secret trials for terror suspects. Well, that's just a bonus.
Well, that's getting on a slippery slope.
Yeah, it's baloney. It's saying we don't have enough to actually try these people, so we're going to just execute them and have an unfair trial. Another place where they seem to be doing that is now with red light cameras, apparently.
Yeah.
It goes children and rape victims, terrorists, and now red light camera violators and speed camera violators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so they're attacking the institution of a public trial in California. That's something that dates back. I said 1,000 years. It is more like several hundred. It dates back to Magna Carta. But
was that like 12 something? Anyways.
Yes, I believe so. 12, 14?
It sounds
I
12,
believe.
14, 12, 15, somewhere around. Anyways.
It's 12 something, 15,
A while back.
But in California, you're no longer allowed to do what at least nobles were allowed to do back in 12, 15 or whatever it was, which is attend a public trial. Members of the public are not allowed to attend red light camera trials and other proceedings at the Superior Court of California courthouse in the city of Corona. For the past several weeks, a policy has been in place denying entry to anyone without direct involvement in a specific case scheduled that day. Court security verifies this information before allowing entrance into the building. Let's see. Please be advised, this is a notice that's posted outside the court. Please be advised that this court facility is closed to the general public. I mean, how you put up a sign that says that? Doesn't that just seem wrong when you write the sign like that? The facility conducts criminal trials Monday through Friday, and only jurors, witnesses, and associated trial personnel are permitted to enter. On Fridays, the facility is also open for litigants reporting for court trial on traffic or minor offense matters. So there you go, Toby. And apparently why they're doing this is because red light camera enforcement is very unpopular, as I think it should be. Thankfully, we don't have that here in New Hampshire as far as I know.
Nope, there's a law against it, actually.
But apparently what members of the public, members of the press do is they go to these public trials. It used to be all trials were public, but I guess the courthouses that remain open to the public so that you can see what the government's doing in your name. Supposedly it's the people's business, right? The court's carrying out the public's business. That's why it's a public trial, because they're doing it for you. You're not working and paying taxes so that the courts can exist.
That's the idea.
The courts exist to provide you some recourse in, if you've been wronged or you have a dispute with somebody.
That's
That
what
used to be
tell
the theory.
people.
That was the theory.
At least they tell people that. Now it's like
it used to actually,
smoke and mirrors is actually
It used
gone.
to actually bear some semblance to reality.
Maybe. But now the smoke and mirror show is gone and they're just honest about it. They're like, we're not allowing people in because, well, what if they learn the tricks of the trade? What if they learn how that person got out of a traffic
And that's
ticket?
what they're worried about here is people going in, and apparently this has been done. Apparently LA County attempted to ban the editor of highwayrobbery.net, which I believe is a website that focuses in on these red light camera enforcement issues. That was back in 2004. They tried to ban him because what he would do is he would go to the trials, see what worked as a successful defense in some cases, and then give other defendants going into court information about previous cases that had been tried that they could cite as precedent and citing, some of the reasons that had been used to get them out of the ticket before, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. That's case law.
That's the idea of law.
Fundamental to the way that the common law, English American legal traditions work is that, yes, you cite previous cases and, in your case, if they're relevant, if they can form a defense. If somebody was acquitted for a given reason and that same reason applies in your case, then if an earlier ruling was made by a court that had jurisdiction, you can point that out.
Makes sense.
But apparently case law,
public trial,
the thing about needing warrants to search your property, and public trials,
off the books.
We're getting to the point where we're just doing away with these things, and these are some of the most fundamental liberties. These are the final checks.
I mean, in a lot of
they
cases,
keep us
they
straight.
go, it's a public trial, but you can't record it. It's a public trial, but only a certain number of people are let in. This is at least more honest, and to a certain extent, I'm starting to embrace that. The honest dictators, the honest people who go, you know what? Screw this idea of governments for the people, constitutional governments, screw that. We're going to just be draconian, do whatever we want, do whatever is best for the good of the government. At least you're being honest there. I can, to a certain extent.
You like the honesty because it's easier
to fight against it. You like the honesty because you go, well, it makes, at least you're being honest. Kind of like, I liked Bush more than Obama because Bush was like, this is what I think we should be doing. We should be blowing up the Middle East and stuff. And Obama's like, we're for peace. Yet he has more wars than Obama ever had. So I like the honesty. I know Bush was not an honest person. I understand that. But the honesty factor really irks me. So I'm not really saying I like this idea of draconian governments. But The point being there. All right, Nick, got to move on here. You said there was a man who won $2 million in the lottery, and it's true.
Well, I just said a guy who won the lottery in Michigan.
Oh, he won $2 million.
I think I said some guy who.
And it was good for him that he won $2 million because, well, he was a little poor before, or maybe not. I'm not really sure. He fit the bill to be collecting food stamps, eating off the government dole. Till he had enough money to spend on scratch tickets, apparently, or some kind of lottery. And he got lucky. He won the lottery. So, yay, he won the lottery. He doesn't have to be on the government dole anymore, does he? Well, no. A man who won $2 million on a Michigan lottery show has told a TV station that he still uses food stamps. Lori Fick of Bay County, admitted he still swipes his electronic card at stores nearly a year after winning a jackpot on Make Me Rich. He told WNEM-TV in blah, 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 that more than half of the prize went towards taxes. So, quote, if you're going to try to make me feel bad, you're not going to do it. Poor man only has $1 million left. How could he possibly live without being on the government dole? Now, this isn't a story about Mr. Fick and me hating on him for collecting food stamps. This is a story to talk about how the wealth redistribution system in this country seems to be a bit flawed.
Yeah, apparently, I think this is actually legal because apparently they're not counting the lottery winnings as part of his.
So you can be a very wealthy person. You can be a millionaire. And since you don't have an income coming in, you get to be on the government dole?
No, maybe there's some holes in the system. Or maybe he's like kind of outside the rules, but he manages to still be on the
Well, how many others are there, Dick?
There's a lot.
The wealth redistribution system in this country is very flawed.
Yes. Yeah, it
keeps people in
poverty. And as you pointed out, he did not have
Yes.
enough money to afford food, we're told. But he did have enough money to play the lottery.
Or some game show. I don't know what he had. He had time to go. I don't know what it is. It's a very short article here. I'll post it up on our show notes. But apparently some Make Me Rich jackpot-y one. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it was a show.
It doesn't really matter. The point is there's deep flaws in this system. And, we've talked about it before. I get it that there's a lot of people hurting out there and could use some assistance. And I'm just not convinced that government wealth redistributions programs are the way to do so. I think that if you look at the numbers, they propagate poverty, they keep people in poverty, they create generational poverty, whereas private charities, if we were focusing on them, the way to help community members, help people in the community, people who are downtrodden and suffering, neighbors helping neighbors, I think it's a better way because you're teaching people to help themselves out. You're helping people get a job so they can earn enough money to put food on the table rather than just giving them a check. Teach a man to fish, and he eats for a lifetime rather than just giving him a fish, or something like that. This is the second show in a row that I've tried to quote Bible verses, Nick, and
Is that a Bible verse?
That's what Jesus said, isn't it?
Was it Jesus or wasn't Paul a fisherman?
There were a lot of fishermen, Nick. It's been a while since I read the Bible. That was way back in when I was 12, long time ago. Get it all muddied together.
You're right. I mean, the point is there are problems with the government welfare system, and one of them is that basically you're providing, the way they're set up today is that they provide a counter incentive. There are a lot of people who are on welfare for a short period of time do get off, but as you pointed out, Toby, there are a lot of people who end up on the dole essentially for life, and their children end up on the dole.
This is life,
right?
Oh, people just check every
right. And
so how do you pull yourself?
And there's a counter incentive there.
Yeah.
I mean, people are incentivized not to necessarily go out and work, but if you don't like working, and a lot of people don't, I think I would go nuts if I was just sitting around collecting a check.
I do want to caveat this, Nick. I do want to say that I'm not trying to blame the people who are in poverty. I know there are multiple systems at play, and the power and privilege have a lot to do with keeping people in poverty. What I am saying, though, and I want to make it clear, is that the current system and the incentives we have set up right now are counterintuitive. So I do want to throw that out there.
Yeah,
I'm aware of systems of power and privilege. I know that it's not easy to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Luck and color of your skin and gender and where you were born, who you're born to, play hugely into how successful you can be in this country and really in the world in general.
They do.
But having these
I don't know how useful it is to focus on those things either, because they're things that are outside
Well,
your
it's important
control.
if everybody knows about them, they're more in our control. So being aware of them is very helpful. unless everyone
You're
goes.
assuming that people would go, we need to get rid of those.
Well, I think that a lot of people are. Anyways, we don't have time to get into the whole power privilege discussion right now. I just think it's important to keep in mind. I do think it's important to keep in mind when you're talking about it.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it's easy to blame the person who's in poverty. But what program?
Well, some people wouldn't necessarily have to be as poor as they are.
Right, but Nick, they're incentivized by the government.
The government subsidizes bad habits,
right.
too. When they subsidize housing and food, yet they still allow you to say, use the cash. Because a lot of people who are receiving government assistance do have jobs. They're just earning a low enough wage, or they have enough expenses, enough children, things like that, that they're getting aid. It's not that they're necessarily not working, but there are a lot of people out there who are on government insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. You know, they've got kids on New Hampshire Healthy Kids in our state, or whatever it is in your state.
If they work 21 hours a week, they won't qualify, so they just stay working 20 hours
Well, it's not necessarily the amount that they work, it's also the amount that you spend. I mean, they might be bringing in 30-something a year, but they have enough kids that they qualify, or 40-something a year. But they also have cable and a flat-screen TV, and in many cases, vehicles that are better than what people who aren't on these programs are driving.
How you go through a trailer park and every car is nicer than mine? I mean, it's just...
Well... It's where you choose to spend your money, Toby. Do you spend it on a vehicle, or do you spend it on housing?
All right, Nick. We've got you plugged it, so we got to get to it. Should we just get to this Bill Clinton story on the radio show?
Yeah, I don't think.
Anyways, just to tease it out. Apparently, you know how everything on the internet, you can say anything and read anything. It's not all factual. Bill Clinton's got a plan to change all this. He's going to have a government agency. Either the U.S. or the UN could run it. It would be like the Federal Reserve, independent agency, so it's trustworthy. His plan is to make this government independent agency, because you know how trustworthy the Federal Reserve is. It's going to do a check and balance on all content on the internet and say what's factual and what's not. So, yay, government agency controlling the content on the internet to decide whether it's true or not. Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll work out wonderfully to have the government act as, or he's saying it wouldn't necessarily be the government, but kind of a government subsidized.
Like the Federal Reserve.
It'd be like NPR or BBC, and or the Federal Reserve.
And they could go control the internet.
Well, they'd be the final arbiter of truth on the internet, because people are going to believe them now. Like the government doesn't already say, here are our facts.
All right. Well,
we need another agency. That's the answer.
We'll try to get to that on this episode of Free Minds Radio. Which, if you've been watching the TV show, you like the radio show, you disagree with some of what we have to say, you can email us. But to be perfectly honest, I don't have too much time to be checking my inbox right now. So if you really want to talk to us, tune into Free Minds Radio. We are live every Sunday from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Log on to our website, freemindsradio.com, freemindstv.org. However you want to get there. You can click and listen live. We're on the Liberty Radio Network and some radio stations out scattered across the U.S. I'm not really sure where. But tune in, call in, give your thoughts, and we'll try to talk about this story. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good night.